Everybody, thank you very much for joining us. As Will mentioned, we are the AIA and SoCal NOMA Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. And without wanting to take up too much time, we're definitely looking forward to this event we have here today. And I will pass it over to Carmen, who will be moderating it for us.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this for Canadian Thanksgiving, becoming from. We are very, very delighted to be able to bring this program to you. We are hoping that this is one of many occasions in which we can have conversations about the Latinx experience in architecture and how it relates to all the initiatives that we see coming in our profession. We have a great set of presenters today. 12 of us together, we are going to do some quick fire presentations and then some Q&As in between, just to talk a little bit about our individual journeys and what has made these unique and what makes it so much more special. On we go. You might be asking yourself, why a conversation on the Latinx experience in architecture? Even though we are seen as the majority minority within architecture, we actually are still a very small minority. Given that the Latin wording or Hispanic wording does not denote a race, but instead a joint cultural experience, it's really difficult to pinpoint one experience that identifies all of us as Hispanic. I myself identify as an Afro-Latina, which means I would denote myself as Black and Hispanic, not necessarily white or others. Others in this panel have other experiences, and therefore we all have a grouping of experiences that makes our path in architecture unique. So the way we're going to set up our discussion tonight is we're going to do a three-phase discussion. We're going to walk through the journey of architecture, starting with students and young practitioners, moving our way through into leadership in the profession. So now I give you Hector Puga. Hector, take it away.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, everyone, for attending this event. I think it's a great opportunity for us to gather the Latino community. I feel like we don't do this enough, and I hope this is the first of many more events where we get to share experiences and gather as a community to celebrate Latinos and Hispanics and everyone that those titles encompass as a community. So for tonight, we're going to be discussing each of our individual trajectories or paths through our Latino experiences plus our architecture profession. So to start, I'm an immigrant from Mexico. I was brought over by my parents, who also immigrated from Mexico to the United States.
Let me get me the earphones.
And as a child, I grew up in the state, in Los Angeles County. I was told by my mom as a child, I always talked about being an architect. I was always attracted to that profession, playing with Legos, playing with Connects. I was always gravitating towards, building things. So that was right away, that was the clue to me that I wanted to pursue a career in architecture, construction. Another thing was working with my dad. My parents are both college educated immigrants to the States that were unable to work in their professions here in the States. So they picked up, new careers over here. My dad worked in facilities and construction and as a handyman. So I was early on, I was exposed to the whole realm, the whole profession of, putting things together, building stuff. So that, helped me move further into pursuing a career in architecture and construction. So working with my dad as a child and just growing up in that environment, it was easy for me to choose architecture as a profession. I went to Cal Poly Pomona, graduated with a bachelor's of architecture. Um, Here on the slides, you can see I've worked with at very different organizations. Starting after college, I went to work at the Getty Center. Then from there, went to Marmol Radziner, then Gensler, and now at USC. So I've always been attracted to organizations that have very diverse staff, very diverse employment opportunities, and support the community through outreach and other forms of programming. So I've worked in architecture for about almost 8 years now. After college, have an MBA. I went to pursue that to tie in to my architecture background, and have now been working as a project manager at USC in real estate. So I have a very strange and diverse background professionally. I never went, just to architecture. I've touched facilities, touched construction, architectural design, and now real estate. So bringing that to, my Latino heritage, my background, is very important for me to always take that into consideration and being able to share those experiences with those in my community that I'm able to talk to through the AIA, reaching out to, young students in minority groups, minority communities that aren't fully exposed to architecture or other professions, bringing that experience, my experience of growing up as an immigrant in the United States and been able to graduate with a college education and pursue an architecture degree and profession, that, it's important for me to show that to students who don't have those exposures, and share that it is able, that they are able to pursue that as a profession. So that's, I always like to give that back to my community through my work, through the organizations that I'm part of, through the people that I work with. Always give back to, those that need it, or those that don't have the opportunities that most of us were given. So yeah, that's my background in 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for attending this great event. And hopefully we can have more conversations like this in the future. Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you, Hector. Our next speaker.
Hello there, is that my cue?
Diana, yes.
Hi there, so my name is Diana Hernandez, and I am currently a student at California Baptist University. I am a senior there, but I am planning on pursuing a master's there as well. I am a first generation college student, and today I want to share with you what it means to be an American Latinx, have an American Latinx identity within architecture. This is up, I am still discovering what this means. And I'd just like to share with you some context about how I grew up and my background, in the hopes that you can see why I see the things I do the way I do, and hopefully so that some of you might be able to better relate. So that can be shown in the next slide. So growing up, I am the daughter of 2 Mexican immigrants. I come from a agricultural family in Mexico. My dad used to work out here in the fields. He decided to finally move his wife and daughter, me, when I was 2 months old out here to the US so he wouldn't feel lonely. And when we grew up here, me growing up here, my parents originally only intended to work here as factory workers and send all their money to Mexico to build their house out there. So for the first, I think 5-6 years of my life, we didn't have any real big commodities or luxuries. We didn't have furniture up until that point because they were convinced that we were going to move back out to Mexico. So I did grow up going back and forth between here in Mexico up until the age of 6. I share this because although I was raised here in the US, I was very much raised the way any female in Mexico might have been. With the exception that I did have certain privileges and certain perks that came with growing up in the US. For example, I did pick up both languages at the same time just by simply watching CNN and Sesame Street. And my parents recognized this. So by the time I was 6 and they had built the house out there in Mexico, they decided we would be staying here to allow me to have the opportunities they thought I could have here. So what has happened from this constant back and forth and just growing up with both of these cultures very near and dear to me was what I recognize nowadays as an identity crisis. And it is something that many of us coming from bicultural families or being immigrants, we do experience at some point in our careers or in our lives. And I can explain that further in the next slide. So what defines a identity crisis is a period of uncertainty and confusion in which a person's sense of identity becomes insecure, typically due to a change in their expected aims or role in society. Now, when we are younger, this might make us more vulnerable to bad influences, bad decisions. We do not feel secure in ourselves and our potential and what we truly want and what our role is in society. When it does happen also as we're older, but we learn to kind of cope with this through talking and finding support. So let me go ahead and explain a little bit about how this is contrasting in both cultures, just growing up with this and why we are prone to go through some kind of an identity crisis. So in the next slide, I break it down into the Latinx culture and the American culture. So in the Latinx culture, we are taught to group think, make decisions, considering the betterment of a community and family, while in the American culture, we are encouraged to nurture our individuality. And I think it would be the next slide after this. In the Latinx culture, we are judged on how well we are able to do what is expected and asked of us, while in American culture, we are judged on how well we can take up space and speak up. We commodify in the Latin culture service and self-sacrifice, and here in America, we commodify self-care. Worthiness is tied to productivity and what we can show for it. Meanwhile, in America, we are worthy no matter the efforts and risks we take. Lastly, we are expected to chase security and comfort growing up as Latinx. And in American, we are expected to chase passions and purpose. So there is a point where we got to realize how to integrate both of these cultures. And then just looking at this, you can start to see how there is strengths in each of these, and specifically for the architecture career, how self-sacrifice and service and thinking of the betterment of community and families might help us better design. Whereas things we learn from the American culture, as in being assertive and celebrating our worthiness, our efforts, and our risks, might also go hand in hand with how we design. So personally, I would like to just touch upon just professional Latinx identity, what that's meant for me. And I can say that during that time, I've questioned who can I relate to, who can I look up to. I didn't know architecture was it was never taught to me growing up that it was a career I could pursue. I had to learn that along the way. And it is kind of difficult when you don't see a lot of prominent examples of this. you do question if you're doing this right. And it'll be in the next slide, sorry. And you question if there is a point where you question if you're renouncing your culture, because it does prove difficult to integrate both a professional setting and what you've kind of been taught in your culture. And this is for some of the reasons I mentioned, and then others I can explain also from the next slide. So coming from a Latina perspective, we are expected to take on 3 or more roles. And we are often misunderstood in that in the Latino household, we do unfortunately tend to value women that are very nurturing, stay at home, can do the cooking and the cleaning. We view that as very priceless. And also the other way, we do value trophy wives who stay home, take care of themselves, look after themselves. And we are, when you decide to pursue a professional career, this could be a little difficult because you are often maybe seen as weird or lazy because they believe you're not able to really complete all your duties. So you do take on 3 roles. You have to be that nurturing woman that wants to provide for the family and be there for the family, also want to be studying, and also wants to be working. So that does become, that is another conflicting role. And a quote I found to kind of explain this is damned if we do, damned if we don't. So you do feel like you kind of have your back against the wall. And that's just something else that does feed onto this kind of identity conflict. So means of support that I found along the way, I would say recruitment. I did not, like I mentioned, I did not know architecture was a degree that I could pursue successfully. Until I spoke to various professors in CBU. They did introduce what architecture was to me. I looked it up for myself. I looked up architecture in Mexico, architecture here. So I think that fact that the recruitment aspect really did help kind of spark that interest in myself. I can also say I wouldn't have gotten as far as I am now if it weren't for the mentorship, for the mentors I have had along the way. And lastly, the support groups. So groups like these where you can relate to other Latinos that have gone through similar experiences or have similar backgrounds as you. So lastly, in the last slide, I'll just share what this has meant for architecture, and you will see this with the rest of the presentations from the rest of our colleagues. So in the last slide, you can see here, I've come to understand that these are not hindrances in our performance. Our diverse experiences and worldviews are an asset. So like I mentioned, coming from both of these separate cultures that value completely opposite values does actually help us integrate them and kind of reconcile them for our design purposes. We can become resourceful in our work. We can do a lot with the little we are given. We do have that bilingual, bicultural communication with both clients and communities. We are able to speak their same language and slang. We have a different way to approach obstacles, innovative design solutions due to these unique experiences and backgrounds. And of course, we can relate to several other minority groups because although I would never say that we have the same experiences, I can say that we do have similar experiences and obstacles. So this just lastly leads us to question if this is an obstacle or an opportunity. I'm coming to understand this is an opportunity. Unfortunately, for many of the people I grew up with, many of my childhood friends, I can say it has become an obstacle for them. It has become limiting because of the culture we were raised in. And you know, I don't want that to be the case. I want more for my community. I would have wanted so much more from colleagues and friends, but I do believe that speaking out about our experiences and just our backgrounds can really help motivate future generations in that regard. And I'm sure you'll hear a lot from a lot of my our other colleagues about their experiences and how that's helped them. But yeah, that's it for me for today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Diana. So our next speaker is Gustavo Gomez.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, my name is Gustavo Gomez. I identify primarily as Mexican American. However, I do have some Filipino as well, and I will speak briefly on that. I've attended East LA College for the last several years, which has led me to working at a small architecture firm in downtown LA, where we do TI work with parks, office buildings, and grocery markets. Um, in the backdrop here, you see a city, which is something I experienced very heavily as a young kid. It's the landscape or the urban um, visual of Burbank, because I used to have a mountain in my backyard, and I would climb that every day and see this. And if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so throughout my childhood, I did want to do something like this. However, some of my other experiences included, living in a Hispanic house where they were always working with their hands, and they built a room for me, just took down some walls, put up some walls, and from my first kind of Lego building, my dad showed me, kind of how a gable roof works and how to put that together in a balcony. Very simple, but I always understood that architecture was kind of working with your hands more, and not so much planning a city like that first picture you've seen. So since I kind of correlated those two together, I didn't really enjoy working with my hands. So I kind of put it off to the side. And going to the next slide, please. So yeah, I lost my vision of what architecture was, and living under an Asian household with my mom, since my parents were divided at an early age. I looked to be a doctor, and I kind of just figured I'd be doing that for college. I didn't think anything of it. So I was an avid gamer. As you can see, I have the gaming headset, which probably no one else has these. And it was until 10th grade where I picked up architecture again. They had me do an architecture essay, which I touched on, and then going into the next slide, which is, 12th grade, they had us do a senior project for our career. And I had a mentor by the name of Tom Reed, who kind of brought me back to architecture in the way that he showed me ELAC and how there was people who looked like me in architecture and what we actually do. And he also took me to several firms, also of Latin culture. And I was, able to, I think I was fortunate to see that there's people who look like me, don't just work with their hands, and, they do planning, like kind of what I envisioned myself doing at the start of, my childhood. And now going to ELAC, I, I think just touching on this again, going to ELAC has helped me, see people of my same culture, and they've also presented scholarships and job opportunities to us, which I find very fortunate. I kind of differ that from others. I feel like I differ from others just because of my path in architecture. And then lastly, I believe, is my firm actually enjoys the work that ELAC students have put out from previous employees. So even though they're of, a white culture, they go to East LA College looking for ELAC students, which I'm very grateful for, because I know, during this moment, like the DEI challenge and all, that's kind of what we're pushing for. Other, more firms to bring in other, more diversity in culture. And yeah, I mean, I have learned a lot with this firm, and I enjoy doing what I'm doing, because this is very close to what I envisioned my child as a childhood, or in my childhood, what I envisioned doing, working on multiple different projects throughout the city. And yeah, I look forward to continue doing this. I think that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo. Hi, everybody. I'm Diana Leticia Hernandez. I currently work at KFA Los Angeles, and I'm really excited to be here with y'all tonight. Pretty good. If you go to the next slide, I can give you a little background on myself. So I am the youngest of 5. I have 4 older siblings. With my mom and dad, we're a family of 7. My mom, Leticia, was born on a ranch in Tepetongo. In Tepetongo, Zacatecas. She's the oldest of 5. My dad, Jose, was also born on a ranch in San Ignacio, Jalisco, and he's the oldest of 10. So we're a big family for sure. As for me, I was born and raised in Baldwin Park, California. We can get next slide. I consider myself to be Mexican American, or Chicana. I've always had a strong connection to my roots thanks to my maternal grandparents. This is their passport photo when they immigrated to Los Angeles in 1965. My grandma was 23, which is how old I am now. It's pretty crazy. My grandpa was 24 and my mom was just 1 year old. Even though they left, they never really left. I spent every summer as a kid in Tepetongo. As soon as I was old enough, so about like maybe 4, my mom sent me with my grandparents to spend all 3 months out there. So we can go next. Thanks to my strong support system, I was able to graduate from UCR with a bachelor's degree in Spanish literature. There's a picture of me with my arracadas jerezanas. If you know, you know. And in all honesty, after high school, like my tocaya Diana was saying, I think I experienced an identity crisis also. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I decided I wanted to study Spanish, because if there was one thing I wanted to know, it was Spanish. I wanted to know the ins and outs. So I thought I would be a Spanish teacher. But it's always been interior design for me. We can go next slide. Here's proof. This is a sketch I found in my journal from 2010, where I drew my dream room with pink walls and purple curtains. I don't think it was until the end of my junior year in college that I was sure that I wanted to pursue interior design as a career. But at that point, I was like more than halfway done with my Spanish literature degree. So I looked into how I could take advantage of my time left at UCR, and I studied abroad my senior year. So if we go to the next slide, we can see I am here at the Milan Cathedral, the Duomo. So I actually cried when I saw the inside of this place. And the only other time that has happened to me is when I saw Coldplay front row and Chris Martin was like 2 feet away from me. So it was a really crazy experience. We can go, and I think it just reinforced my love for architecture and interior design mostly. If we go to the next slide, today I am lucky enough to work for KFA, where I don't have to look very far for emerging Latinx voices. In fact, 2 of my coworkers will be speaking tonight. Next slide. As for DEI conversations, if we go to the next slide, KFA has allowed myself and one of my colleagues, which were probably the 2 youngest people at the firm, the space to start a book club called Read and Roar, where we like discuss topics revolving around racial equity in our profession. So in the next slide, I can tell you a little bit about what I do at KFA, more specifically. I'm the construction admin assistant. So I process RFIs and submittals for like 4 to 6 projects, and then I route them to their consultants, and I do follow-up, phone calls. I love it here. Like a year ago did not know what RFI or submittals were, and OAC. I learned that you guys use a lot of acronyms for sure. If we go to the next slide, you can see one of the things that I've worked on. I was able to work one-on-one with Barbara Fleming, which is royalty in my books, on this color study for one of our projects. So KFA knows that I'm interested in interior design. Whenever something ties in with anything like colors or anything interior related, they'll like ask me if I want to be a part of it. And I think that's pretty awesome that they help foster my growth. So if you go to the next slide, I am currently, aside from working full-time at KFA, I'm enrolled in UCLA's Extension Center, getting my certificate of interior design. I just started last summer, so I'm in my second quarter, and one of my first projects was like we had to build a birdhouse of an architect, right? And first thing I did was like Mexican female architects, so I could like do my project around them, but they were like, you need to choose somebody we're gonna recognize. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll do Luis Barragan. So there's me and my birdhouse, one of my first projects. So I'm currently getting my certificate of interior design, which will feed into their master program, and that's my ultimate goal. I want to be an interior architect. If you go to the next slide. So yeah, I'm excited to color Los Angeles and the world maybe with my brown crayon, along with all of your guys' help. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Now we will go for our first round of Q&A. So this is what we are calling our early career group. So for all of the speakers that have gone so far, what do you think is unique about the Latin journey in today's culture and social climate? Feel free to raise your hand, whoever wants to respond first.
Sorry, Carmen, can you repeat that real quick?
What do you think is unique about the Latinx journey in today's cultural and social climate? I'm going to send us a lifeline. We have an extra special guest that's also joining us tonight, and he'll be here to help us with these Q&A. So I'd like to introduce Tony Gonzalez from HNTV. Tony, would you introduce yourself to all of us tonight?
Sure, Carmen, I'd be glad to. I'm Tony Gonzalez, been an AIA member for a number of years, been in practice for probably over 40 years now. So it's great to hear, especially our younger architects coming up and their experiences. I loved all the family photos. I think that's really a part of how we get our base in our lives. So that was wonderful to see those family photos. And it's also interesting about the backgrounds and the journeys, as I've referred to them, which are different. I mean, they're all different. Mine was different. I grew up in East LA, went to school during the 60s and 70s, and very involved in the Latino culture of the East Side of Los Angeles. As part of the involved in the Chicano moratorium, the blowouts and those types of things, and that took me to Cal Poly Pomona, in which I was involved in MECHA, and another group was called Chicanos for Creative Design. So I kind of grew up in that kind of culture in Los Angeles area that was almost kind of like this counter protest, yelling, "This is who we are," that kind of thing. And so I guess my question to those who have already spoke is when I was in school, it was very, very contentious in architecture at the time. How do you all feel about how you're treated today, and especially the Latinas who are very much a growing group of architects, but who are many times looked at differently than even Latinos. So I'm interested in knowing, what's the feel like? Do you feel part of the group, or do you feel like you're something less than the rest? Those types of things. Do you feel that you need to work harder to prove yourself? So if some of you can ask or answer that kind of question.
So I'd like to open that one up to all our Latina speakers tonight. So Diana, and Elisa, if you guys, if one of you wants to chime in.
Personally, I will say, I think we only limit ourselves. Well, I mean, there's like a lot of factors, like I overviewed a bit, that do make us believe like we have to limit ourselves. I think I've understood maybe this isn't the case, but we do need to feel, I think it's important we feel comfortable enough during the process of us trying to figure it out, how to integrate, these different kinds of identities that we and roles that we have to fit. I don't know. I feel like there was a point in my life where I felt like I wouldn't be able to fit the mom role that a lot of Latinas want to have. And I felt there was also another point in my life where I was going to have to renounce to my culture in order to be professional in this career, in order to be successful in the career. And I did not like feeling that way. I really can't say what it was. I don't know if it was just that I didn't feel comfortable being able to express, myself, my identities for how I am, or if it was just myself limiting myself based on my ideals and my family's ideals and my professor's ideals, just having to fit all these roles. I really can't say. I don't know if anybody else might have a better answer to that.
Well, I think the family is also important. I mean, when I was coming up, I first one to graduate in my family at the time as well. But I had there was a lot of pushback. I mean, I had an uncle who was a general contractor, rough and tough guy, liked to drink a lot, liked to have me drink a lot. But there was always that, like, why are you being an architect? I can get you a job in construction and you can make all this money. So, and for all of you, I mean, was, as what are we calling ourselves now, Latinx, was there kind of that kind of pushback was in your families, you should, get married and have kids and that kind of thing. Was there that kind of pressure on the opposite side telling you that you're not going to make it? You shouldn't be thinking about these kind of things as a Latino or Latina?
I can say that, yeah, that had the same experience, from family members, cousins, especially those that lived in Mexico. I feel like being raised here as opposed to being raised in Mexico. I had the support of my parents, who pushed us, my siblings and myself, to be college educated, so we would have more opportunities than they did living here. And yeah, it was definitely, growing up, always cousins, why are you in school? Why are you going to college? You can just go work, be a concrete worker or a masonry worker or something like that. Cousins working in construction. It's easier to get this job. It's quicker to make money. You don't need the degree. You're just wasting your time and your money in education. But I saw further than that. It wasn't just a quick buck that I can make. I saw it more in the long term. Thankfully, the support that I had from my parents and my family, immediate family here, that, pursuing a degree in architecture, it was tough. It was very tough. 5 years. Paying the whole education yourself, and just trying to get those assignments done. It was tough, but it was totally worth it, I feel, in the end, regardless of what, family and society pressures were. and that's something that I definitely would love to push to the younger generations that either don't see it as an opportunity or as something that can be achieved, that it can be achieved. So
Yeah, there's a whole next generation coming up of people of younger kids in sort of the K through 12 level that that need to be encouraged and not discouraged. Is someone else had a answer or want to say something?
We're tight on time, so in order to make sure we get through our entire career path, I'm going to move us on to the mid-career group and start talking about what experiences come next after you have a few years out in the field, out in the practice, and what that looks like for Latinos. So we'll start off with Eric Rodriguez.
All right, thanks, Carmen. If you could go to the first slide. So I grew up in a gated community out in Northridge, up in the San Fernando Valley, and sadly, it was gated for all the wrong reasons. The locals actually came to call it Tijuanita or Little TJ. Reason for that is because of the community had a gate completely wrapping it. You couldn't move through it, and a lot of the people who inhabited the apartments there were immigrants from Mexico and Central America. Next slide. Many from the outside, though, failed to see what I saw from the inside, which was a vibrant community, a place that had festivals from Michoacan, altars, and wrestling matches dedicated to the Virgen of Guadalupe, businesses being run out of apartments. You could get tacos, candy, a haircut. My mom is actually the one giving haircuts up on the right out of the porch. So this vibrant community existed. And exists to this day. Next slide. In 2012, as I was doing my degree project at Woodbury University, I partnered with a nonprofit to use some of my skills and put them to work to work with youth in the community who were growing up. And we did this called City Art Play, and we went out, creating opportunities for the kids to interact with their neighbors and for the neighbors to interact and learn more about the nonprofit that was in the community providing social services. Next slide. Upon graduating in 2013, I worked for an architect, urban designer, where I had an opportunity to work on this project, which was reimagining children's museums, and it focused on breaking open sort of the institution of children's museums and identifying strategies for them to serve the neighborhoods that they were located in. So not just being a place that's focusing on exhibits where people have to come to it, but that the museum could go out into neighborhoods. Next slide. The following year, I actually I moved out to Cleveland, Ohio, as part of the Enterprise World's Architectural Fellowship. This is a fellowship that offers an opportunity for designers who are looking to advocate for community-based design within affordable housing developers. And I was fortunate to be placed with these two nonprofits who are doing this work, and where I really got to work in the community on the ground. Next slide. I continued that work that I was doing with youth, because I think the voices of youth are so important for us to elevate within the process of building our communities. This is making our own space where I was able to work with them to teach them how to use tools to build structures, play structures, or whatever idea, benches, whatever they had for green spaces. Next slide. I also worked on looking at commercial corridors and recognizing the expertise of citizens that lived in those neighborhoods. So I mapped out information that would allow them to make decisions about how their community is built, what gets built in their neighborhood. Next slide. One of the projects I'm most proud of is this project here. It's called the Box Spot. We worked with entrepreneurs, neighborhood entrepreneurs who were looking for spaces to house their businesses within the community that were low cost, low barrier to entry. We recruited these entrepreneurs to come through a process of having them present to the community what services they would bring. There was a candy shop, a barber shop, a t-shirt printing company, eyewear company, and a clothing store. Next slide. Here's the box spot itself completed as of last year. So it was, it's 11 shipping containers, all organized around the central courtyard that allows for community gatherings, festivals, and just an opportunity for people to come together and visit and become customers of the businesses. Next slide. So after LeBron won the championship in 2016 out in Cleveland, I called him up and I said, hey, let's go to LA. I think they need us over there. No, I'm just kidding. I came to LA to work for KFA. I came and I started working with KFA. A lot of the work they do focuses on housing, and it's been a really great experience for me. Continuing that work of introducing the learnings that I had from my community, from where I grew up, into permanent supportive housing. So that's the main focus of the projects that I'm working on today. This is one in Palmdale, bit of a suburban project. Next slide. This is Ingraham Apartments. It's currently under construction. It's 120 units of permanent supportive housing as well, and also a project that I'm proud to be a part of the team and see it get built. Next slide. And then just a sketch of a teaching kitchen that's currently sort of in schematic work. But just to kind of wrap it all up, I'm looking to continue to incorporate and advocate for community-based design in any projects that I do, and I'm really excited to continue that work with KFA and here in LA. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jorge Mutis. I am originally from Bogota, Colombia. Carmen, if you could go to the first slide. I wanted to take a moment and kind of look at the series of experiences that really shape the character of an architect. I faithfully believe that architects shape the buildings that shape society. So for this particular conversation, I wanted to share a few of the images that subconsciously shaped me. If you go to the next slide, you'll see my vernacular. This is my Bogota. This is where I grew up. This is where I spent the first 17 years of my life. I have to say that I never wanted to be an architect. Architect was never part of my plans. So this really is part of my subconscious understanding of how I came to be who I am today. And so ideas of dwelling, open space, community, and especially at the bottom left, ideas of inequality, where you could see a neighborhood that is 80 years old right across the street from a development that is just about 10 years old at that time. If you go to the next image, this part of the city is just a few blocks from where I was born. And I find really fascinating this idea of architecture without architects. This kind of spontaneity that happens without the political hand, and yet it allows communities to thrive in completely ununderstandable ways. We see structures that rise up to 5 stories high, and very thriving commercial conditions mixed with very dense residential areas. In the next image, I'm gonna make just flashbacks of very specific episodes that, particularly to me, started to add a level of understanding to what public space is and can be. Just look at the chaos of Bogota. These are images. Most of these images I gathered from Google Earth um, just this weekend. But these were images that I lived through when I was little. I used to go swimming in this place. But what's really interesting to me is that this chaos is really embedded into a level of kind of art expression. Look at the bottom, how Corten steel really dances as you move and seems to bend, but in reality, it's just the same arc sitting. And all these elements, without me knowing it, are becoming an intrinsic part of my architectural profession. Next. Education in Bogota really happens without much choice within a Catholic context. This church was designed in 1926. Next. And I used to take classes inside this space once a week. And one of the images that I showed at the beginning showed a very humble church. That was the church that I actually went to by choice with my family in my neighborhood. But this was the church that I had to go in school. And you can contrast this level of opulence and power all within the same city. That really started to subconsciously give me an understanding of the powers and the potentials of an inequality and the ability to achieve these different aspects of quality of a space. Next. Looking back at a very particular memory as a child was perhaps a moment in which architecture really became apparent, yet without me knowing it. And it is the Virgilio Barco Public Library. Next. The major of Medellin at that time, not related to this particular project, but used to say something very important to me, understanding it now, which is that the most important buildings of the city belong in the most underserved areas. And this is one amazing example of it. The previous image that I show you was actually taken from this white triangle here at the bottom. And you're looking at a building really located in the southern portion of Bogota, not the most affluent section, yet perhaps one of the greatest expressions of Colombian architecture. Next. And one thing that I found incredibly powerful about this building is how much this building, yet powerful and monumental, was so open and exposed to its exterior. You could see the Andes mountain ranges in the back, being one of the major features of Bogota and Colombia, all the way down south, but really expressed in this building. And next, you could see how this public library, it's a very dynamic space that not only embraces its function as a library and as an interior space, of course, but also its exterior. The terraces were completely habitable and really open to the surroundings. Next. And so this brings me to the idea of public open space. And at the time when I was in Bogota, the image to the left is the 7th Avenue, one of the most prominent streets back then. And it was in the downtown of the city, and it was thriving, as you see it, not only with pedestrian, but also vehicular activity. And one of the things that I find fascinating is how such an impetus for public space, while having the necessity for vehicular transportation, actually managed to be a political transformative effort, and it became a completely pedestrian artery for the street. So now cars don't have any access to it. So if you look in the next image, you see how this massive real estate, it's really now free and openly occupied by pedestrians. Next. Now, getting closer a little bit to present history, one of the elements that also was extremely present in my life in Bogota was once again this use of public space and the idea of ciclovia. Perhaps you've heard of Ciclavia here in Los Angeles, but actually Ciclovia started in Bogota 40 years ago. It closed down all the major streets across the city, and it started to happen every single Sunday. The image that you see on the left and right are both representative of what happens today or what used to happen before the pandemic in Bogota and in Los Angeles. And so the subconscious idea of the things that really affect us as humans and as we turn into professionals really start to take shape. And finally, next, I want to bring it, the next image, I want to bring it finally to Los Angeles. And while I wanted to share a window of all these different spaces that made my experience and my memories from Bogota, really, I wanted just to end with an opportunity to actually turn those memories into actual work as a professional architect. And this is one of my favorite images from the project Destination Crenshaw, located in South Los Angeles. And it's a 1.3 mile long outdoor museum. Some of you may be familiar with it. The project will start construction by the end of the year. And I hope it's really just one example of how we as Latinx designers bring a perspective that is fully loaded with culture and complexity and contradictions that really benefit and provide a wealth of nuance to the architectural challenges that we face today, especially in the age of so much inequality and in the age of gentrification. Thank you.
We have Eric in the room.
Hey Carmen, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Great. Hi everyone. My name is Eric Solis. I'm really excited to be here today to share my experience, my journey through the architecture profession as a Hispanic person. Next slide. So I'm a very visual person and I love maps. So I'm going to start with this slide first. This is a map of Mexico in the early 19th century. And I consider myself Mexican, as you can see by this map. All the stars on the map you can trace to my family lineage, starting from the north in the Bay Area of California to Los Angeles, Mexicali in Baja California, the desert American native tribe of Navajo, and down in Mexico to Mazatlan, Jalisco, and DF, Ciudad de Mexico. Next, please. Next slide. Okay. So a little history lesson. My great grandfather, circled there on the bottom of the image. This is where my family got. Oops, you can go back one slide, please. Okay.
Eric, are you seeing the screen?
You can start here. So, so the image you see here is my great grandfather and my great grandmother there on the right. They had a little carniceria in East LA in the 1920s. And this is an image of their store on the left-hand side. and it still stands today. So this is where my family lineage got our start in Los Angeles. The next slide, please. Okay, so so circled on the bottom of this image, this is my great-grandfather, Inez Flores, the man you saw in the previous slide. And this is at a construction site that he worked on in Los Angeles in the industrial district. This photo was taken in 1918. And it really warms my heart to know that part of my family history is embedded in the history of Los Angeles, and he helped build the Southern Pacific Central Railroad Station, which you'll see on the next slide. Next image, please. So the central station that you'll see in this image is no longer standing today, but it is one of those structures that is sort of a ghost of Los Angeles's past. And it really represents the grandeur of old Los Angeles. And it really is amazing to know that my great-grandfather contributed to the construction of this building that once existed at the corner of 5th Street and Central Avenue in the industrial district of Los Angeles. Next slide, please. So, so fast forward to today. So I'm actually continuing the history of building Los Angeles. So with the 6th Street Viaduct project, I've been involved with this project since 2012, when the city invited architects and engineers to contribute to a international design competition to replace the historic 6th Street Viaduct with a new structure. Next slide. And this image shows a rendering of what the new 6th Street Viaduct will look like, viewed from the east, looking west. So that you're standing on the Boyle Heights side here. So the new viaduct is going to connect Boyle Heights with downtown Los Angeles. And it's going to be a really iconic structure for the city that will hopefully do the original 6th Street Viaduct justice with its iconography. And its architecture is contributed through Michael Maltzin Architecture, and engineering and executive architect is HNTB. Next slide, please. So the 6th Street Viaduct, it really represents the epicenter, really, of the Chicano culture in Los Angeles. It is the epicenter of the lowriders and the culture that's associated with East LA and Chicano culture. And working on this project, it really was important for me to honor the culture that is represented through this project, through the various community events that I helped organize through the life of the design of the project. Next image, please. So, this image just really speaks to the culture of the place and the people that it represents. The image on the left is a group of cholas in the 90s, hanging out on the bridge on the east side, close to Boyle Heights. And the image on the right is a Chicano man, in his lowrider, hanging out underneath the 6th Street Bridge, which is such an iconic place for these people in this culture. Next. So like I said earlier, is that while working on this project, I found it very important that I contributed to the culture of this project and the iconography that this bridge represents for the community. So I actually assisted in organizing and coming up with an idea for doing a community farewell festival on the bridge to sort of send off the bridge and its old life, and to invite the community to experience the bridge one last time together. It was a really cool event. There were taco trucks, taqueros. There was a lowrider show on the bridge. There was mariachis. And it was a really cool event where the whole community showed up from downtown to Boyle Heights, and it united the community for everybody to experience the bridge one last time before the new bridge was to be constructed. Next, please. So, so this image is a picture of the model of the 6th Street Viaduct at that event, at the community event. And, this was really important to have that model there so that the community could experience the new viaduct in person at a smaller scale. So it was not just an event for bringing the community together, but it was also an event to educate the community about the project that was forthcoming in the future. Next. So this image is, so this really speaks to the, the next part and that I want to conclude on is just, wrapping up my identity. This is a mural by Diego Rivera, La Gran Tenochtitlan, which represents the ancient Aztec culture in what was then the capital of the Aztec Empire, which is present-day Mexico City. And this, this mural is really, it's iconic, and it really speaks to me, and that I love looking at it, that it shows the daily life of the Mexican people and, the culture behind the place that I love. And you can see the city of Tenochtitlan in the background there, which is present-day Mexico City. And where the Templo Mayor, which is the largest temple in the city, is where the Zocalo is today. And according to ancient Aztec folklore, next slide, please. The Zocalo was the epicenter of the universe, actually. So that really speaks to me, and Mexico City is somewhere that is really near and dear to my heart. And since this is a story about the journey that I'm taking, I'm actually going to be relocating to Mexico City next week, where I'm going to be immersing myself in the culture that I love and experiencing being a part of a global design community there. And thank you, everybody, for listening and partaking in my journey through architecture.
Thank you, Eric. So a little bit of housekeeping before we move on to Jaime. So we are at 6:40. We have 20 more minutes of the scheduled time for this event. However, we still have 5 additional presenters to go through. So if you all would stick around after 7 p.m. in true Latin fashion, we're going to run a little late. So now we'll go to Jaime.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I'll make it quick. My name is Jaime. Preferred pronouns are homie, homie, or homies. I'm a senior associate at KFA. My first slide shows a bit of my origins. I'm the proud child of immigrant farm workers and product of the LAUSD public school system. I went to Ivanhoe Elementary in Silver Lake, and I'm very grateful that I went there during a period of time when the neighborhood was very culturally and socioeconomically diverse. As you can see, my friends are different shapes, sizes, and colors. And my high school was about 60% Latino. and overall about 85% minority. So the minority was the majority, with a heavy Latinx flavor. In this way, I consider my high school experience to be very much quintessentially Angelino. And on the upper right is me and my dad at Chichen Itza, because throughout my childhood, my parents would take us to trips to Mexico to see the archaeology, see the great murals, like every summer. So I grew up with a lot of knowledge and pride in our culture. Next slide, please. So my journey in architecture was sort of circuitous. Some examples of my early student work. I went to Harvard and studied film and art. And then I got a master's of architecture at Cal Poly Pomona with a desire to do public work when I graduated and serve the community. So my first job was doing institutional work. As you can imagine, the transition from the design-oriented academic curriculum to the more prosaic requirements of educational work was very abrupt. In order to learn the ropes and fit in and excel professionally, for the most part, I had to sort of subvert my perspective and my aesthetic, and to earn credibility. And I found outlets to do that, to kind of do my own thing through architectural mission trips and volunteering my skills in Central America and India. But at work, after earning the trust of my superiors, I was given some opportunity to do design work, and you can see here on the bottom right is the Pasadena Water and Power Operations Office. Next slide, please. So kind of these days, in 2013, I defected to the west side of LA and joined KFA, and shortly after developed an interest in native plants and how they can restore native fauna. And as someone who also enjoys gardening and cooking, this intersected into a curiosity about native foods, and eventually my hobby sparked an exploration into the idea of native or indigenous Los Angeles architecture. So I started by researching indigenous architecture of the Tongva, Chumash, and Miwok. And it's, at least to me, it doesn't easily lend itself to multifamily housing, which is what I do now. But I have learned a lot. On the bottom right, you'll see the coat of arms of Los Angeles. And interesting note is that it reflects our history as a city. So for the record, California was part of Spain for 279 years. And to put that in a frame of reference, it won't be until the year 2129 that California will have been a part of the US as long as it's been a part of Spain. I also had to acknowledge that I didn't know any Tongva personally, and it's sort of a futile effort to try to turn back the hands of time. The image on the bottom left is Eric Fisher's racial and ethnicity map based on the 2010 census, which despite sort of my conflicts with the terms of race, it does reaffirm my experience about my neighborhood in Silver Lake being very mixed in terms of its diversity. So I sort of come to this conclusion that I think the indigeneity is the mixture of fusion with time, because there's no pure being or pure place. It's always influenced by the living culture. And it's obvious that LA has its own living culture made up of the mestizos and the European immigrants who have come to the region. And a lot of the history of the people has been deleted. But what I find is surprising, sort of feel is missing, is that LA doesn't have an indigenous architectural identity, especially given that through the entertainment industry, we export culture and lifestyle to the rest of the world. And it's in architectural settings that create the spaces and backdrops for where these lifestyles unfold. And in fact, LA, for the most part, has resisted being codified as an architectural language, which I also support. But I often come back to the mid-century modernism of the Case Study Project as like a touchstone and a locally generated movement that was devoid of historical and colonial precedent. But I still think that we in the field, and especially as Latinx designers, can kind of decolonize our thinking about architecture. Next slide and my last slide. So here's some current examples of work. I do mostly affordable housing these days, and I'm kind of at the place of where I'm trying to familiarize myself and surround myself with forms of indigenous art, with the hopes that it will come out of my work in a way that reflects and honors our community without co-opting it. And so there's some Chumash cave paintings here, there's some graffiti. And we used to be punished for vandalizing buildings, but and that makes it a little hard to reframe this as a legitimate cultural reference for me. But in our last meet and greet, we sort of touched on this. The presenters had a meet and greet about the struggle some Latinx can experience finding value in our own perspectives. But I think it's important that we infuse our work with our personal voices and perspectives. I think it's critical. I think there's a lot of room that we're not using to better integrate culture, especially for Latinx and Black brothers and sisters in our work. At KFA, our work's very collaborative, a lot of teams and people, a lot of voices. But I do think and believe that diverse groups make better decisions. We solve problems better because we challenge assumptions. And I think that we need to bring ourselves to work every day. There used to be bring your son or daughter to work day, but I think we should treat every day like it's bring yourself to work day, and value our opinions and our perspectives. So, there's a lot of ways to approach architecture. And I'm sort of at the point where I feel like, we would benefit by not trying to follow others to see how to do it, but to find our own perspectives. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. It's a tough act to follow. Love your work, James. So we'll start. My name is Hector Manuel Perez. I'm an associate professor at Woodbury School of Architecture. I was born in 1960 in Guadalajara, Mexico, and migrated in 1974 to Santa Monica, California with my family. As a 13-year-old immigrant, I went through an ESL education, first to learn the language and then hopefully become integrated into the culture. Over the past 25 plus years, I have had an unorthodox practice that fluctuates between academia, art, artifacts, architecture, and in 2012, I jumped to the dark side and became a real estate development. Next. During my formative years in early professional development, drawing and collage fueled my interest in architecture, and the exploration between abstraction and representation were key components of my education and my professional practice. Next. My professional career started in 1985 with a brief stint at Pacific Associates Planners Architects, PAPA, in San Diego, where I was what was called the office boy. I ran errands, prints, and made presentation drawings that fortunately for me as a third-year architecture student landed me in the cover of Progressive Architecture magazine. Then I worked briefly at Gensler and Associates in Santa Monica, and then ultimately I worked at Taller Enrique Norten, 10 Arquitectos in Mexico City. My independent practice began in 1993 when I moved to San Diego and co-founded ODA, Oficina de Arquitectura, with Teddy Cruz. And finally, in 1999, I launched my current practice, my current studio, De Arc. Next. Throughout my years in practice, I have designed private and public projects, both collaboratively and solo. Next. And concurrently, I have been a design studio instructor at various institutions in the United States, Mexico, and throughout Latin America. Most significantly, I have organized academic programs and exchanges with and for architecture students from across the Americas, including the LALA program that was run for 6 years at SCIARC and SoCalEX that I ran at NSA for 4 years. Next. Locally, I've always enjoyed designing, organizing, and building community engagement projects like many of you. And that work has really kept me in touch with my people, the communities that I work with. I've become sort of an integral part and constantly renewing my belief in giving back. Next. My leap of faith into real estate development started in 2009 at the bottom of the Great Recession when I bought a 3,900 square foot corner lot in Barrio Logan that it had been vacant since 1964 when the construction of the freeway dissected the community of Barrio Logan into Logan Heights and Barrio Logan. Barrio Logan is also one of the oldest neighborhoods in San Diego and is located on the southwestern edge of downtown, adjacent to the largest naval base in California and 15 miles north of the San Diego-Tijuana border, the most cross-border in the world. Barrio Logan has also a contested and regenerative dynamic that both made it attractive and affordable. Next. With Chicano Park, a national historic landmark at its center, Barrio Logan is also a culturally loaded neighborhood, teeming with arts, design, and educational initiatives that was designated a California Cultural District in 2018. Next. After designing, making models, running performance, processing permits, and negotiating very difficult construction loan, in 2012, I built this 3,900 square foot, 8-unit mixed-use project called La Esquina. Next. Beyond its urban, architectural, and artistic attributes, the most relevant and the thing that I'm most proud about this project, La Esquina, is that it has become a creator incubator and a meaningful cultural contributor to the community. Next. Inspired by the success of La Esquina, I partnered with Kate Mears, Jay Catanach, and Alex Alemani to begin a new development project that I'm happy to share that we broke ground 4 weeks ago and it's under construction. This next project is called Los Patios, pretty generic names that I always come up with. And it's also a mixed-use project that aspires to add to the vibrancy of Barrio Logan, while following a community mandate to clean up and reactivate a previously contaminated brownfield. Barrio Sí, Yonques No, and we hope to bring this to life by December 2021. Next. Los Patios is organized around the central patio, and we talk about references to our own experiences and our cultural heritage. The patio as a central social organizer in housing projects is prevalent throughout our history. And this project attempts to make a homage to that. Not only that, every unit, every suite has a private patio or deck. And the unit mix consists of 40 loft suites and 20 commercial units. The Nativo Coffee House will be coming from Tijuana to open. Miguel Marshall is a Tijuana entrepreneur that will be coming to San Diego. And Frutas and Tortas will be also opening there. Another Latina entrepreneur that has now 4 of those in San Diego. Next. So this design, develop, and build mode of practice has also impacted my academic career. And in 2016, I joined the faculty of the MS-ARC RED program at Woodbury School of Architecture. Beyond designing and making speculative models, the MS-ARC RED students learn to identify development opportunities, design innovative housing, quantify scale and cost, verify financial viability, monetize sweat equity, which is a key component, and build meaningful and profitable infill projects. Next. Over the last 15 years of the MRED program, our alumni and faculty have incrementally built some of the most innovative small infill projects in San Diego, one lot at a time. It's got some pretty impressive statistics here, and the portfolio of projects, it's undeniably unique and illustrative of what can be done when you pair entrepreneurship and design. Next. So to conclude, by choice, I have made Barrio Logan my field of operations. And while Woodbury School of Architecture continues to inform and expand my practice through social engagement, design thinking, and entrepreneurship, con mi gente y para mi gente has become the way that I live my life. Thank you.
Thank you for sticking around, guys. We don't have a lot of chances to talk, so we're gonna keep going. Hello. So thank you for this. My name is Rene Rodriguez, Director of Operation at Egan Simon Architecture, and I'm both Boricua and Puerto Riqueño. Boricua to the people of my island and Puerto Rico to the rest. I'm both a US citizen and uniquely Latino, reflecting the schizophrenic beauty which is being a mutt from Latin America. I'm gonna do this. The power of Power of architecture and design were prevalent in my earliest memories. As the son of a social worker who worked in Tokyo, a waterlogged shanty in the periphery of both the city and society in Puerto Rico, and a union leader who thought himself a Renaissance man, my house was full of manifests, both visual and written, and my life full of everyday examples of the juxtaposition of beauty and suffering, or maybe of the beauty of suffering. Modernism and the Brady School architecture were all around me, yet I was being bombarded with the quaint images defining Caribbean architecture, minimizing the reality of who I was. People like Neutra, Henry Klum, and Nicodoma were impacting my daily life without even knowing their names, and informing my ideas of the build form and its impact on the urban fabric, thus shaping my understanding of the political meaning of buildings. I saw the power and impact of walls and bridges, both metaphorical and real, and a bunch of failed urban scale moves which further the challenges of my island. This understanding is what forced me into architecture school. You guys might not all of you will know, but in 1996, when Avisa Social Club came out, here external forces defining Caribbean music. It's a great record, but it called for the quaint nostalgia of the 40s and stood as a counterpoint for potential new directions in Latin American music. This renewed interest in the Caribbean was reflected in the Havana project. And again, external forces were discussing the potential redevelopment of a Caribbean city. Time and time again, I kept hearing these white and European voices telling me how the Latin American urban fabric should work. This is not a criticism of these efforts, but these scenarios reinforce the colonial cycle and forced me to deal with the reality that if we were going to have a seat at the table, it would not be given. At the same time, I heard my rallying cry, and Hector knows about this, is all the charcoals on the table. This cry reflected the passion from professors and peers on a studio called LALA, which showed me the power of what our experiences bring to the table when we use our own visual language. It became clear that my voice was not in the theories or images that were readily available. Remember, Google launched in 1996, but luckily I was in a space that allowed this exploration. I was either allowed or overlooked to seek this connection to a Latin American architecture, beyond the ideas of Hispanophilia, the quaintness, or the magentas and cobalt blues that had defined it up to this point. I needed to define what it meant for me. So what is Latin American architecture? It is not an aesthetic. It's born from the incongruency of being everything, treated like visitors in our own land. We're Black, we're white, we're native, we're from our history, but intrinsically modern. We lost faith in our institutions, but passionately believe in our leaders. And by leaders, I mean the ones who lead, not the ones who have the title. And more than anything, we believe in our family, our tribe, our community. Our designers might not win all awards, but when the discussion turns to social justice, there will always be one of us there. As designers, we look beyond the building, beyond the property lines, and try to address how communities work and how planning impacts the lives of people. So now out of school and a definition of what to do, I found a place that would let me try. Out of the 1968 civil rights movement, from a charge to insert ourselves in the discourse of social justice, the Design Center movement was born. Spent 19 years working with underserved communities with LACDC, making sure I proved that we Latinos could not only build it, but we could design it as well. This chapter ended in South LA, where I got the opportunity to spend 3 months working with community to develop a vision for a building that would bridge Black and Brown communities, the new forces of the neighborhood like the Expo line, with the residents who've been there and seen it all. And most importantly, to listen, to learn, to shepherd a process where the architecture can be full of meaning. This is an enriching process where design achieves a political dimension of empowerment and democratization, turning neighbors into advocates and feeling of ownership for all involved. So what's my challenge? One more. I've been lucky. I've been in positions where I have been allowed to find my voice, where I've been able to reject those aggressions to my brownness and those of others, and not to have to pay the price. I know of many that were not that lucky. I have to continue to learn, to connect, and engage, to grow the tribe, to grow the tide. Because our journey is one more. So our journey is only beginning. Carlos Fuentes said, reading, writing, teaching, learning, and I would need to add to that, building even more so, are all activities aimed at introducing civilizations to each other. No culture retains its identity in isolation. Identities are attained in contact, in contrast, in breakthrough. We as Latin American designers, architects, urban planners, students, associates, etc., must face the current challenges head on, become part of the conversation to amplify the tapestry of voices in support of a truly inclusive profession. Muchas gracias.
Bravo, bravo.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm James Rojas, and I'm a city planner. And my journey is, I was born and raised in East LA, and I was at MIT one day, and the teacher was talking about the good city and the bad city, and I thought, well, where does East LA fit in? As a Latino, I love that place, but at that time during the 90s, 80s, there was a lot of gangs there, and people thought it was a dangerous place. So I went back there and wanted to tell a different story about my community and the way, and by doing this, by telling the story, I realized how Latinos in the US are transforming the American landscape. For example, this woman with brooms, on the sidewalk, you see this all over LA. What does that mean for the city? So it's all based on memory, need, and aspiration. Next slide. I took my camera out to the community and just took slides of people everywhere. What are Latinos doing out in the streets, and how they tell a story about our culture and how we're changing the American city and thinking about cities in really different ways, bringing a different perspective and landscapes that were ours historically, but now they've been changed by planners. Next slide. So I looked at the front yard of the house, and I looked at the threshold of the house and how how Latino neighborhoods have a lot of front yard fences, around them, and what does that mean, compared to the American house? And I think what I realized is that Latinos are making this plaza in their front yard because they come to the U.S. and they miss the space, where they take community and they build it in their front yard. So it really changes the way Americans think, or the way we build our suburban, or think about our suburban streets by these Latino architects. But these are just everyday people changing the landscape and how they tell their story. Next slide. So this kind of creates new forms of urbanism in our community. This is a project we worked on in Boyle Heights a couple of years ago. There was a cemetery jogging path. It's a jogging path on the cemetery that people would use, and we got the city to build a rubberized track around it. And now it's called the gym on the east side. But it's a new form of urbanism for the U.S. Next. So my fascination now is, how do we as Latinos live in the U.S.? What's our spatial dimensions? What's our psychology of space here in the U.S.? So I did a lot of workshops with Latinos all over the country based on using objects. So when I was a kid growing up, my grandmother gave me a shoebox of objects and said, build something. So that's how I learned about city planning and architecture. So I run workshops with Latinos and all different groups of people, and having to build their favorite child memory with their hands. Because I think for a lot of Latinos, our hands are who we are, and that's important to us to think about it. So having them use their hands, you have better engagement. Next slide. So yeah, so people build their child memory, their hands, and tell their story about who they are, where they come from, what they value. Next slide. And then everybody talks. We get everybody. This is in Pittsburgh, working with Latinos out there, Central America, and have them tell a story about where they come from. And this really connects Latinos to the civic engagement process that we need to build communities. Next. And this is working in Eugene, Oregon, working on parks, how to get Latinos to use parks. We just had them do a model up there and have Latinos talk about their parks, what they want to see there, and it's really successful. Next. This is just educating our youth, taking a group of Latinos high school kids down to the Mission in San Francisco and telling them, what do you see here, what do you feel here, and how is this your language? So I think a lot of Latinos, like myself, we have a lot of self-doubt. We come from these neighborhoods that were squatchy, put together, and it's not these middle-class neighborhoods, so we think we're kind of subpar, but in reality, we have more ideas than everybody else does. Next slide. So I worked on this project in Rialto, where we looked at the culture, we looked at the Latino streetscapes and said, this should be the urban design for your community. This is what you do, what you make, and how do we make it as part of a streetscape plan that really celebrates Latino urbanism in the front yard. Next. So this is my website and work. I do over 1,000 workshops all over the country, engaging Latinos in this whole civic engagement process and how they can really engage in building spaces that they want to be in. I think we have, as Latinos, we have to think of ourselves as, how to engage the next generation, how to engage our community members in this whole building process. Thank you.
Okay, I'm the last one, so you guys don't have to wait so much longer. Thank you everybody for waiting, and thank you for everybody before me who made such amazing presentations. What a big, broad array of histories and cultures, and I'm so honored to be part of this group. And so I'm gonna take you through a quick journey to explore how I blur the lines between architecture, landscape, and horticulture. I started my life and my career in the Dominican Republic, where I worked mostly in the hospitality industry. Can be jealous about living in the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean, building and designing hotels. And then I came to SCI-Arc, to Los Angeles, for a master's in architecture called Metropolitan Research and Design, where I honed my research skills. And then quickly discovered that Los Angeles was the best place to blur the canvas of indoor-outdoor spaces. And so my work led me to architecture. Next slide, please. The Dominican Republic, where I'm from, it is extremely biodiverse. We have the tallest mountain in the Caribbean. We have the lowest point also below sea level. We have beaches of all colors. My uncle and aunt and my parents who are here took me to explore all of this as I grew up. It was really a big influence in me to learn about the environment that I was living in. Culturally, the Dominican Republic, the Taino, which are our natives, brought you the La Hamaca, the hammock. That you can thank our little Taino Indians anytime you rest in a hammock for it. We also brought you merengue, bachata, and dembow. So the mix of cultures between Africans, Tainos, and as well as European, mostly Spanish, has brought this very incredibly rich history and landscape in my life. Next slide. And so now my career has been transformed from architecture to landscape. I have the architecture in me is reflected in my hardscape details. I am very intricate. Next slide. I have, Carmen, if you can do the next one. I worked really hard on my pools. I love pool details. I love they continue to blur the indoor with outdoor. That courtyard design is very much a Latin thing, and I worked very hard to bring those spaces into the houses. Next slide. But my nature is to be in nature. That's just how it is. So I've taken my research history and studies and brought it into my landscape. So Carmen, next slide. Yeah, so next slide also. It's the projects I've worked on with Rios. And so I have a very high environmental sensibility. And so I try to, I study then what is it that I can do with my landscape? How can I make my world a better place and a better place for not just me, but everybody around, and the legacy that we're leaving. And so I study permaculture and I apply those into my work. Next slide. I also, I'm an avid nursery person. I visit so many nurseries all the time. I know the industry very well. I have the pulse of it. I also like to guide tours in landscapes. This is me at the ASLA when I was in LA guiding a tour of the Huntington Gardens. Next slide. And then I am able to apply my plant knowledge not only to plant things digitally, next slide, as well as hands-on on the field. This is the Scanso Gardens. We are doing the master plan there. I implemented the front entry garden. We have reclaimed water. All the water from the Scanso Gardens, from our kitchens and bathrooms, go into a treatment facility and is being used in the gardens. And this is the first garden implemented with that system. We built hugelkultur mounds, which are mounds that sequester carbon using just plant debris and lots of soil, all from site. So it was a very environmentally sensitive application. And we're monitoring it for biodiversity and the study of just what we did with this space that was previously practically an abandoned garden. And last slide is my next project. Now I am focused on fire ecology in the wild urban interface. We were granted a research project with the California Climate Investment and CAL FIRE, and in collaboration with the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains, I co-led the research and led the design of a website. Carmen, next slide, please. Which is called the Sustainable Defensible Space. The actual website is defensiblespace.org. Please take a look at it. This website is the first one for Southern California that has a comprehensive study of fire ecology in our climate, because up to this point, the information was mostly about Northern California and forests that are pine and conifer forests. We have chaparral and coastal sage scrub, very different fire ecology. And we are in a fire ecology. So we need to know that we have to live with fire and how to live with fire in a sustainable manner. Huge areas on landscape and plants to help the wild urban interface, which are people that are living within a mile of great open vast lands, survive the risk of fire. And with that, I am done. And this has been an amazing, amazing group of people. Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you, everyone. I want to give a special thanks to Will Wright and the JEDI Committee for backing us up in this wild idea we had to share our Latin stories. We hope this is one of many. If you guys would like to see more programming focused towards the Latinx experience in California, reach out to Will Wright. Just blast them with emails and we will come up with additional programming. There's a lot more to talk about. Unfortunately, we were so excited to share with you guys that we try to pack in one too many presentations, but I think it was worth it. You've heard many diverse voices and there are so many more out there that we'd like to have come join us. So again, thank you for everyone who joined us and was part of this. Thank you to AIA. Thank you to SoCal NOMA for supporting this as well. And we look forward to seeing all of you again and many more of us speaking about our journeys in architecture.